Greetings to all my loyal followers and first-time visitors. Since Harry was always on the side of good, dark magic in the books was only partially explored, its fragments are scattered throughout the saga or mentioned in supplemental sources. Today, I invite you to take a deeper dive into this mysterious and shadowy branch of magic as we uncover the key truths about the dark arts. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The dark arts are magic intended to cause harm. Dark magic isn't necessarily connected to demons or otherworldly forces. The term covers any magic used with the intent to harm another being. In fact, any spell can be considered dark if used with malicious intent. Number 2. Dark magic requires a true desire to cause harm. Jokes about accidentally casting Avada Kedavra don't hold up. Dark magic demands a genuine will to hurt. Bellatrix Lestrange once said that the unforgivable curses only work when the caster truly wants to cause pain. When Harry tried to use the Cruciatus curse on Bellatrix, it failed. He was angry, but not filled with cruel intent. However, in the final book, when he cast the same curse on Amicus Caro with determination, it worked. Number 3. Dark wounds cannot be fully healed. In the magical world, most injuries are healed instantly, but wounds caused by dark magic often leave permanent marks. The most famous example is Harry's lightning bolt scar left by Voldemort's curse. Other examples include Dumbledore's blackened hand, George's ear lost in an explosion, and Bill's werewolf bites, all inflicted by dark forces, and no spell could undo the damage. Number 4. Some creatures are inherently tied to darkness. The basilisk is a child of dark magic, bred by a Parselmouth wizard. Dementors are not merely grim creatures, they are the embodiment of sorrow, torment, and pure darkness. They appear where pain takes form. Number 5. In Britain, dark magic isn't completely outlawed. Although the unforgivable curses are illegal, other forms of dark magic are tolerated to some extent. The shop Borgin & Burkes proves this. It openly deals in sinister artifacts. Some objects there are harmless, like the vanishing cabinet. Others, like the cursed necklace used by Draco on Katie Bell, are dangerous. You can buy them, but using them on someone is strictly forbidden. Number 6. Not every wand is suited for dark magic. Every wand is unique. However, some cores are poorly suited for darkness. For example, unicorn hair is considered too pure and noble to support dark spells. Wandmaker Ollivander once said that such wands weaken when held by someone with evil intentions. Fun fact, Draco Malfoy's wand had a unicorn hair core, perhaps reflecting his inner doubts and inability to become a true dark wizard. Number 7. Ordinary objects can be turned into cursed traps. Throughout the books, we see harmless items turned deadly: teapots, baskets, jewelry, enchanted with dark magic to become lethal traps. But the most terrifying example is the Horcrux. Voldemort used everyday items to hide pieces of his soul. These artifacts didn't just harm people, they corrupted their very minds. Number 8. Dark magic isn't always evil. Many believe the dark arts are purely wicked, but that's not entirely true. It all depends on the motive. Take Snape, for example. He killed Dumbledore, but only at Dumbledore's own request, to protect the boy and complete the plan. Was that an act of evil, or the highest form of mercy? Or Harry, who used the Imperius Curse to infiltrate Gringotts, breaking the law, but in the name of the greater good. Number 9. The most terrifying spells were invented manually. The darkest spells weren't found in books. They were invented, crafted by hand, whispered into being by wizards who weren't just cruel, but creative. Magic like that isn't inherited. It's made, built slowly, through pain, through obsession. Severus Snape created Sectum Sempra when he was still a boy. He didn't learn it in class. He wrote it in the margins of his own notebook. "For enemies," the note said, just 2 words, but the spell sliced deep. When Harry used it on Draco, blood poured across the bathroom floor, not because the magic was ancient, but because it was personal, raw, untamed. This is what makes dark magic different. It evolves. It doesn't wait for approval. No curriculum teaches you how to twist a stunning spell into something lethal. That comes from somewhere else, somewhere inside, and once it's made, it spreads like fire. One wizard creates, another copies. The curse grows legs and walks. Snape buried his inventions, hid them away. But not all dark wizards do. Some leave their work behind like a legacy, like a challenge. Every cursed blade, every forbidden scroll, every hidden ritual, it all started with someone asking, what if? And that's the most dangerous question in the magical world. Number 10. Horcruxes are the peak of darkness, but not the only path. A Horcrux is the darkest of creations. It splits the soul, it feeds on murder, it's irreversible, but it's not the only way to reach for power through darkness. Some wizards feared crossing that final line, yet they still walked close to the edge. They turned to rituals, bloody, ancient, and forgotten. In the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, there's mention of occult bonds, magical links between a wizard and a dark object. No soul-splitting, no death required. At least, not human death. One ritual described in Blood in the Root called for the heart of a unicorn, bound in silver and buried beneath moonlight for 7 days. The wizard who performed it gained speed, strength, and unmatched focus for exactly 1 lunar cycle. These rituals never granted immortality, but they offered something almost as tempting: control over pain, over fear, over death itself. There were whispers of a witch named Morwenna Kral who could silence a room with a word. Her wand had been buried for years beside cursed relics. She swore the earth spoke to her. Some say she never cast a spell again, but things still happened when she whispered. Number 11. Spells can become corrupted by dark magic. Magic can change. It bends, warps, corrupts. A simple spell, when soaked in hatred, may no longer be what it once was. This is called distortion. Not theory, not metaphor, but real, dangerous change. It happens when anger seeps into the magic itself, over time, overuse. Then even a schoolbook charm becomes a weapon. Take Petrificus Totalus, harmless at first, a basic bodybind curse. First years learn it in defense against the dark arts, but in the hands of someone cruel, someone who uses it again and again to dominate, to humiliate, it starts to shift. Oral reports tell of victims left unconscious, muscles torn, spines damaged. One file describes a case in Knockturn Alley where the curse snapped a wizard's neck. The caster had used it daily for years to punish his house elf. Wizards from the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes began calling these mutations twists. A twisted spell is unstable, it lashes out, it forgets its limits. Moody once warned Tonks, "Don't make a habit of hurting people with the same spell, you'll teach it to like it." That wasn't paranoia, it was experience. Magic is not math, it's not fixed. It breathes, reacts, learns from you. What you feel while casting matters. Rage makes spells sharper, fear makes them wild. Love sometimes makes them stronger. But hatred? Hatred poisons them. Over time, the spell becomes a reflection of your intent, not your words. Even Hogwarts has felt it. In the dungeons, one professor found scorch marks left by what was supposed to be a levitation charm, but it blasted holes through stone. The student casting it had a history of bullying. He said he only wanted to make the feather fly harder. The charm disagreed. Number 12. Dark spells can cling to the soul. Dark magic leaves a scar no spell can erase. Some curses don't end when the wand is lowered. They cling, not to skin, but to the soul. Auras like Alastor Moody could feel it. "You can smell it on them," he said once. Even years later, even when they're smiling. It wasn't superstition, it was instinct. Magic remembers. The unforgivable curses, Avada Kedavra, Imperius, Cruciatus, are more than spells. They mark the caster. The moment you use them, something changes, something turns. That's why they're forbidden. Not just because of what they do to others, but because of what they do to you. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't just enjoy torture, she was shaped by it, moulded by the curse she loved to cast. Some former Death Eaters tried to walk away. They cut their hair, burned their robes, moved to quiet places, but they couldn't escape the noise, the nightmares, the whispers in their sleep. One man confessed in a trial that after casting Cruciatus 5 times, he began to hear it. At night, a scream not from others, but from within. The more a spell is cast, the deeper it sinks, like venom under skin. Some wizards reported phantom pain in the arm they used to curse. Others forgot the faces of loved ones, but remembered every spell they cast in rage. It wasn't memory loss, it was soul decay. The magic eats what it touches. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry tried to use Cruciatus on Bellatrix, it failed. She laughed. "You have to mean it, Potter," she sneered. "You need to enjoy it." That's the cost. Dark magic doesn't work unless you feed it. And once you do, it starts feeding back. On your fear, your anger, your need to hurt. Number 13, there are schools where dark arts are studied openly. Not all magical schools fear the dark arts. Hogwarts teaches defense, never attack. Curses are forbidden, unforgivable spells and names whispered in corridors, not written on blackboards. But other schools see things differently. In Durmstrang, for example, darkness is not hidden. It is studied, understood, controlled, or so they believe. Victor Krum once told Hermione, "At Durmstrang we do not shy away from the dark arts. It is important to understand them." He said it simply without shame. To him, power was not good or bad. Power was just power. What mattered was the hand that held it, but hands are fallible. And darkness is patient. Durmstrang has a long history of dangerous graduates. Gellert Grindelwald was one of them. He walked those halls, he learned their lessons, and then he turned those lessons into war. The school does not speak his name, but his shadow still clings to its stones. Some say he was a genius, others a madman. All agree he started with curiosity and ended with destruction. Can someone study darkness without being consumed by it? That's the question. Can a wizard truly learn the art of pain, fear, and control, and never be tempted to use it? Dumbledore believed knowledge was not the danger. "It is the unknown we fear," he once told Harry. "When we look upon death and darkness, we fear what we do not understand. But understanding darkness and embracing it are not the same." There's a line, thin, unclear. Student might study a curse to defend against it. But what happens when they realize how effective it is? When defense turns into retaliation? When justice becomes vengeance? That's where the fall begins, not in a great act of evil, but in a small decision, one the caster justifies, one they repeat. Number 14. Dark artifacts can possess their own will. Some dark objects don't just hold magic, they are magic. Living, thinking, waiting, they whisper, they lure, they feed. You don't control them, they control you. These artifacts weren't enchanted with kindness, they were created to twist, to tempt, to trap. And once you touch them, something in you changes. Tom Riddle's diary is the clearest example. It looked innocent. Blank pages, a little worn. But the moment Ginny Weasley wrote in it, it wrote back. Not with ink, but with charm, comfort, understanding. A 16-year-old memory of Tom Riddle slowly pulled her in. He didn't just share secrets, he took them. He drained her. "Little Ginny's been writing in my diary for months," he said in The Chamber of Secrets, "pouring out her soul." And while she wrote, he grew stronger. That diary was a Horcrux, yes, but more than that, it had intent. It wanted to survive, it wanted to return. It used Ginny's fears and loneliness. It made her trust it. Then it made her act. She didn't remember opening the chamber, didn't know she'd nearly killed. That's how dark objects work. They never force, they seduce. And the diary wasn't the only one. There's a story, unconfirmed, buried in whispers, of the Mirror of Maleficarum, not to be confused with the Mirror of Erised. This one didn't show dreams, it showed madness. They say A student at Durmstrang once stared into it for hours. At first he laughed, then he cried, then he screamed. He clawed at his own face, trying to stop seeing. Some say he never spoke again. Dark artifacts feed on emotion, loneliness, fear, pride. They lie still for years, waiting, but the moment someone desperate touches them, they react, sometimes with voices, sometimes with warmth, sometimes with visions. It feels like connection, it feels like power, but it's always hunger, their hunger. Number 15. Dark rituals almost always require a sacrifice. Dark rituals always demand a price, not gold, not time, but something far more personal. Blood, flesh, memory, a piece of the soul, even life. You don't cast dark rituals, you sacrifice them into being. Voldemort knew. He didn't rise again with a wand wave. He clawed his way back through blood and bone. In the Goblet of Fire, the ritual was brutal. Bone of the Father unknowingly given. Flesh of the servant willingly sacrificed. Blood of the enemy forcibly taken. Magic like that doesn't whisper. It screams, it takes what it wants. Peter Pettigrew's hand hit the stone with a wet slap. His screams echoed through the trees. That wasn't courage, that was payment. His reward, a silver hand from Voldemort himself. Cold, strong, cursed, it later killed him without hesitation. Dark magic doesn't give, it lends and collects with interest. These rituals aren't rare because they're forbidden. They're rare because they're terrifying. Every time something is lost, and not always something you meant to give. Some gave voices to command storms. Others erased their own names to vanish from time. These aren't ghost stories, these are truths buried in magical history. Wizards say the ground remembers blood. Wands used in such rites hum at night. Some whisper, some scream. Even the darkest sorcerers fear them, not because of what the rituals take, but because of what they leave behind. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore led Harry to a cave. It stank of death, the water cursed, the boat cursed, the lake full of inferi, drowned victims bound to dark will. "This place has known magic," Dumbledore said. "Very dark magic, powerful but deeply unnatural." That's the truth. Dark rituals aren't spells, they're scars on the world. Number 16. Some potions can also be considered dark magic. When we think of dark magic, our minds often leap to unforgivable curses, Avada Kedavra, Cruciatus, and Imperius. We picture dark cloaks, forbidden tomes, and the chilling whispers of malevolent spells. But there exists another realm, often ignored, lurking in the quiet simmer of cauldrons, veiled by the thick mist of brewed concoctions, potions. Though not always categorized alongside curses or hexes, certain potions are every bit as insidious and deadly. Their power lies not in dramatic wand movements, but in subtlety, in being slipped unnoticed into a goblet, a sip away from horror. The draught of living death is one such elixir. One drop, as Professor Slughorn once dramatically declared in class, would send the drinker into a death-like slumber so profound that he or she would appear dead. It is not a tool for healing, nor is it a safeguard. It is a potion designed to mimic death so precisely that even the most skilled Mediwitch might be fooled. In the wrong hands, it becomes a tool of assassination or a vehicle of disappearance. Consider how easy it would be to stage a suicide, to remove a political rival, to hide a child, and how long it would take before anyone questioned the seemingly lifeless body. The true terror of this potion lies in its silence. No scream, no flash of green light, just stillness. It was Severus Snape who mastered the draught of living death during his time as a student, improving upon the standard recipe. In Harry's 6th year, using the Half-Blood Prince's annotated potions book, he learned to crush the soporiferous bean with a silver dagger rather than cutting it, and to stir counterclockwise instead of clockwise. These seemingly minor alterations made the potion far more potent, and yet this wasn't presented as a lesson in evil, but in talent. That's the disturbing beauty of it. dark potential dressed up as academic excellence. But some potions are more direct in their cruelty. It is whispered among former Aurors that the Death Eaters used a potion during the First Wizarding War to induce madness in captives. The exact name has been lost or perhaps deliberately hidden by the Ministry of Magic, but accounts from within Azkaban suggest it was administered before Dementors arrived. One former prisoner, long since released and still haunted, described it as a darkness poured into the mind, like black smoke filling every memory with screaming. The potion didn't just erase sanity, it shattered the soul into jagged fragments. They wanted us broken, he said, so the Dementors wouldn't have to work as hard. Such a concoction must have required rare and malevolent ingredients. One theory, proposed by St. Mungo's healer, Gwenog Blight, is that powdered banshee bones were part of the brew, mixed with mooncalf blood and a drop of the brewer's own regret, collected magically at the moment of its strongest swell. This was magic of the psyche aimed at the architecture of thought, and this surely must be called dark. The ethical implications deepen when we remember who taught potions at Hogwarts for over 15 years. Severus Snape, once a Death Eater, taught students how to make draughts that could poison, paralyze, and deceive. He spoke with fascination about poisons, testing antidotes, and brewing truth serums. "I can teach you how to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses," he said in his very first lesson. "I can tell you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stop a death." That final promise, stop a death, was not just metaphor. In the right hands, potions are healing. In the wrong ones, they're torture. Snape also taught students to brew the Polyjuice Potion, a brew not inherently evil, but certainly one that enables deceit. It takes a month to make, involving ingredients such as fluxweed picked at the full moon, and the essence of the person to be imitated. The very idea of consuming someone's hair, or worse, to become them, even for an hour, brushes against a terrifying erosion of identity. When Harry, Ron and Hermione used it in their second year, the result was played for laughs. But imagine a darker purpose, a Death Eater, slipping into the ministry disguised as the minister himself, issuing decrees, signing executions. And who would know? Dolores Umbridge, known for her own brand of bureaucratic evil, once used Veritaserum during interrogations. The potion itself is not banned, but its forced use is considered a violation of magical rights. "You are lying, Mr. Potter," she said sweetly, after threatening him with the potion, "and I shall use any means to prove it." The idea that one's mind could be plundered through potion, a chemical invasion of the soul, draws a parallel to the Imperious Curse. Free will becomes meaningless when a few drops in your tea can rip the truth from your throat. And what of poisons? The line between potion and poison is paper thin. Belladonna, arsenic, aconite, all ingredients present in the shelves of Snape's classroom, are fatal in the wrong dosages. One might argue that brewing poisons is necessary to teach antidotes, but who watches when a student decides to take their knowledge a step further? In the Half-Blood Prince's book, next to notes about the draught of peace, are scribbled enhancements to a poison that leaves no taste. No one knows if Snape ever used it, but he wrote it down. Babiti. The Department of Mysteries has long studied a potion referred to only as oblivium. It is said to erase not just memory but identity. The unspeakables refuse to confirm its existence, but legends abound. One tale speaks of a wizard who drank it to forget the murders he committed, only to wake up with no sense of self, locked in a room with no mirrors. Another claims that the potion was used to erase the memories of squibs born into pure-blood families, so they could be returned to Muggle life without shame. A potion designed to erase truth, to rewrite the soul's narrative. That is not neutrality. That is control. That is evil. Number 17. Dark marks are not just symbols. The dark mark was not just a symbol, it was a curse, a contract and a leash. all etched into the skin by the most feared wizard of his time. When Bellatrix Lestrange showed her mark to Severus Snape in the dusty drawing-room of number 12 Grimmauld Place, there was no pride in her voice, only a trembling reverence, a sickness of obsession. "The Dark Lord has returned," she whispered. "He calls us through the mark." But few ever questioned what magic truly burned beneath that black skull and serpent. The mark was more than ink. It was carved with magic that predated Voldemort himself. According to obscure manuscripts housed in the restricted section at Hogwarts, the design bore eerie resemblance to a rune called Ithak Velthar, mentioned in the Codex Nocturnus, a forbidden tome banned since 1749. That rune was said to represent submission through flame. Ancient and nearly forgotten until Voldemort found it. He did not simply create a mark to summon, he revived a lost branch of control magic, one steeped in the rituals of blood and obedience. Every Death Eater bore it on their left forearm. Not a choice, but a right. Those initiated described a blazing pain at the moment it was placed. Igor Karkaroff, in front of the Wizengamot, trembled as he revealed the mark. "It burned," he confessed, "not just on the skin, inside, like it was rooting itself into me. The pain was part of the enchantment, Voldemort ensuring that fear and loyalty were fused together." When Voldemort touched the mark of a servant, it flared with heat on the skin of all others, an instant signal, one that tore through disillusionment charms and occlumency barriers. Apparition, no matter how far, could not shield a Death Eater from the call, and they always felt the call. "It's how he summons us," Snape explained, "but it's also how he watches." What most never realized was that the mark never stopped pulsing, like a heartbeat of the Dark Lord inside their veins. There were rumors that the Dark Mark could read more than location. Augustus Rookwood, a former Unspeakable, once claimed in Azkaban that the mark responded to emotion. "You could feel him when you were afraid," he said, grinning through his madness. He liked fear. It made the mark throb like it was breathing. Some prisoners believed the mark whispered at night, a faint hiss in the blood, compelling them to dream of fire and darkness. Could Voldemort tap into their minds through it? The case of Malcolm Avery provides chilling support for this theory. After Voldemort's first fall, Avery grew erratic, paranoid. He was found wandering Knockturn Alley, screaming about the burning voice in his skin. Witnesses said he clawed at his forearm, shouting, "He's not gone, he's inside us." St. Mungo's healers attempted to remove the mark. They failed. The curse resisted all magical interference. Not even severing charms could peel it away. The mark remained, dormant, but watching. More than a symbol, the Dark Mark was Voldemort's way of reducing powerful witches and wizards into extensions of his will. His army bore no insignias, no banners, just the mark. It was intimate, terrifying. And those who carried it were bound not only by fear, but by blood magic. During trials after the First Wizarding War, Dumbledore hinted that the mark was not unlike a binding magical contract, similar to the unbreakable vow. "They could not disobey him," he said grimly, "not without suffering." A curious passage from the Talisman of Noreldor speaks of marks of the Flame Lord, signs used in the early Dark Ages to enslave mages who had turned to necromancy. These marks would burn hotter when the bearer lied or tried to resist. Is it so far-fetched to believe Voldemort, in his endless thirst for ancient power, adapted such sorcery? He did not invent darkness, he simply sharpened it, molded it into his tool. Yet Voldemort's Dark Mark was not the first of its kind. There are records of older marks used for control. The infamous Hounds of Morgana, a rogue faction operating in the 1700s in Transylvania, used a sigil etched in blood to command cursed slaves. Their leader, Vorin Dragomir, a warlock excommunicated from Durmstrang, inscribed his followers with the Morgana Fang, a symbol that allowed him to cause unbearable pain or death with a mere thought. The Peveril Scrolls refer to it as the Leash of Shadows. Dragomir's mark could compel obedience by severing the bearer's magical connection. Essentially, he could mute their magic. A wand in hand became a stick. Some claim Voldemort learned of this through a now-destroyed copy of The Terrors of the Carpathian Night, once held at Borgin and Berks. If he adopted any part of this mark, it would explain why Death Eaters feared rebellion even when their master was gone. Magic itself would betray them. Notably, the mark may have also created psychic resonance between Death Eaters. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, Lucius Malfoy and Rodolphus Lestrange moved in eerie coordination. They didn't speak, Tonks later said. It was like they knew what the other was about to do. The mark may have allowed shared awareness in combat, limited but deadly effective. A magical version of a hive mind? Scholars at the Salem Witches Institute have recently proposed the theory of tethered consciousness, born from enchanted tattoos. The Dark Mark is their primary case study. There is one particularly horrifying tale, the fate of Thorfinn Roll. Captured in 1998, he claimed that after Voldemort's rebirth, the mark altered. It started feeding, he told Ministry interrogators. When he got stronger, I felt it, like he was draining something from me, like my magic wasn't fully mine anymore. Could the mark have served as a siphon, channeling strength from his followers? Voldemort, after all, was obsessed with cheating death. What if the Dark Mark was part of that equation? Number 18. Some spells can alter a wizard's personality. There is a darkness in magic that goes beyond spells and wands, a subtle current that flows not around a wizard, but through him. When Bellatrix Lestrange tortured Hermione in the Malfoy Manor, her eyes gleamed not with triumph, but something worse: pleasure. The Cruciatus curse, meant to cause unbearable pain, had etched itself into Bellatrix's soul like a lover's signature. It was not just the magic that harmed others, it was the way it rewrote the caster from the inside. Some spells, especially those tied to dark magic, are not content with merely changing the world around a wizard, they change the wizard himself. Mad-Eye Moody, or more precisely, Barty Crouch Jr., masquerading as him, once lectured students with a peculiar intensity. "You need to know what you're up against. You need to be prepared," he said, right before performing the 3 unforgivable curses in front of a classroom of stunned children. But it wasn't just a lesson. Barty's performance was almost gleeful, like a former addict returning to his favorite poison. And it wasn't the first time he had used them. Years of loyalty to Voldemort, marked by the frequent use of the Cruciatus and Imperius curses, had twisted Barty into someone who could pass as Mad-Eye without blinking. The lesson was disturbing not only because of the magic, but because of how natural it seemed to him. The Imperius curse is perhaps the most insidious of all. To control another person's mind is to steal their essence, but to do so repeatedly requires a detachment from the very idea of free will. Aurors who fought in the First Wizarding War, like Alastor Moody and Kingsley Shacklebolt, often spoke in hushed tones about colleagues who, in desperation, used Imperius on Death Eaters. Not all came back the same. "You look into someone's eyes," one unnamed Auror was quoted in an old Daily Prophet report, "and you feel that moment, their fear, their helplessness. Then the next time, it doesn't bother you so much. And the third time, you stop noticing their eyes at all." During the Second Wizarding War, the Ministry briefly authorized Aurors to use unforgivable curses in battle. It was a necessary evil, many said, but even necessity has a cost. Nymphadora Tonks, usually so full of warmth and humour, confided once to Molly Weasley that she had been forced to use the Cruciatus on a Death Eater threatening a Muggle family. "It worked," she said, her voice trembling. "He screamed, and all I could think of was how easy it was. That scared me more than anything. The mind of a wizard is not immune to what his wand channels. The Cruciatus Curse requires a specific intention. You have to mean it, as Bellatrix told Harry. That intent to cause pain for pain's sake demands a part of the soul to align with cruelty. The more often one reaches for that emotion, the more it becomes second nature. In this way, the spell doesn't just hurt others, it cultivates sadism in the caster. Bartemius Crouch Sr. authorized Aurors to use any means necessary in the fight against Voldemort. The result? Many, like Crouch Jr., never returned to who they were. Others became shadows of themselves. There is a reason Dumbledore refused to endorse such measures, even in the face of war. "Dark times lie ahead of us," he once warned, "and there will be a time when we must choose between what is easy and what is right." For Dumbledore, the line was not about victory, it was about the soul. Dolores Umbridge never used the unforgivable curses. She didn't need to. Her brand of cruelty was systematic, polished, masked in law and order. But there's a reason the Ministry approved her as someone fit to use the full arsenal if needed. The mindset, the bureaucratic lack of empathy, the delight in control was already there. Had she used Imperius, it's doubtful anyone would have noticed the difference in her behavior. Some spells require intent, but others simply seek a suitable host. Even Sirius Black, during his time in Azkaban, changed under the weight of dark proximity. Though innocent, he spent 12 years surrounded by Dementors, creatures that feed on every shred of happiness and morality. When he emerged, he was free, but haunted, unpredictable, quick to rage. In his own words, "I did my waiting," he shouted at Peter Pettigrew, 12 years of it in Azkaban. Though his heart remained noble, something in him had cracked. And that wasn't even from casting dark magic, just from being near it. Consider the case of Severus Snape. Once a boy fascinated with power and vengeance, Snape immersed himself in the dark arts during his youth. Over time, his identity became fragmented, part spy, part killer, part savior. When he begged Dumbledore to protect Lily Potter, it wasn't a rebirth, it was a reckoning. "You disgust me," Dumbledore told him when Snape suggested he only cared about Lily. And yet Snape continued to use dark magic for the Order, for the greater good. But he was never whole again. His face, pale and tight, seemed always pulled by guilt and control. His was not a life lived freely, but a soul at constant war with the echoes of its own spells. Bellatrix Lestrange is perhaps the clearest example. Before her descent into madness, she was a brilliant, proud witch from the noble house of Black. But repeated exposure to Cruciatus, to Imperius, and to the toxic worship of Voldemort corroded her identity. Her laugh became fractured, her joy manic, her empathy obliterated. "You need to mean them, Potter," she shrieked. "You need to really want to cause pain, to enjoy it, righteous boy." In that line alone, the shift is clear. She no longer understands that someone could not enjoy pain. Number 19. Dark magic cannot simply be forgotten. There is a moment when a wand trembles ever so slightly in your hand, not because of the spell you're casting, but because of the weight of the choice you've just made. For those who've touched the shadows of magic, this moment divides life into a before and after. Even when the spell has ended, when the wand is holstered, and the world seems unchanged, something inside has shifted. Dark magic, true, forbidden, soul-staining magic, leaves a mark that not even the purest remorse can fully erase. Alastor Moody once said, "You can't just dip your toes into the dark and expect to pull them out clean." He wasn't exaggerating. The scars aren't just emotional, they're magical residues that cling like soot in your veins. The Aurors of the First Wizarding War learned this the hard way. Many of them had to study the unforgivable curses intimately, often casting them under strict ministry supervision as part of their training to resist and understand, but knowledge came at a cost. Take the case of Elric Thorn, an Auror whose name has been all but forgotten in public record. He was known among his peers as brilliant, but intense, almost too intense. Thorn had a gift for understanding the Cruciatus curse. He could recognize it in the residue of a crime scene, like a hound scenting blood. He even demonstrated it once, under controlled conditions, on a Death Eater who had consented in exchange for leniency. Thorn's hands shook for days afterward. He couldn't look his wife in the eye. He resigned a year later, muttering about voices that weren't there. 3 months after his resignation, he vanished. Kingsley Shacklebolt recalled him once, quietly, over tea with Arthur Weasley. Elric looked into the abyss too long, and it blinked. The haunting thing was that Thorn hadn't used the curse out of hatred. He had done it to understand, to protect, to shield others. But intent, as Dumbledore once warned, does not always shield the soul. The echo of pain he inflicted never stopped reverberating in his own body. Some believe that merely witnessing dark magic is enough to erode a wizard's spirit. The prisoners of Azkaban weren't the only ones haunted. The Aurors who patrolled its perimeter before the fall of the Dementors often reported hallucinations, nightmares, bouts of unexplained rage. Rufus Scrimgeour, even before his tenure as Minister of Magic, had spent years combating dark forces and was known for his volatility. He became a man ruled by suspicion, a man of rigid lines and no grey zones. "There is no room for doubt in war," he once told Amelia Bones. But perhaps what he meant was there is no room for fear because he had too much of it himself. The memory of casting a forbidden spell doesn't fade like ordinary recollections. It etches itself into the mind like a brand. Consider Severus Snape, who lived his adult life beneath a thick veil of remorse. Though he defected from Voldemort's ranks and risked everything to protect Lily Potter's son, there were moments, brief flickers in his eyes, where you could see the ghost of the person he once was, not only in how he spoke to students with sharp cruelty, but in how he wielded spells. His duel with McGonagall in the Great Hall was quick, precise, efficient. She was defending Hogwarts, he was defending his secret. But his movements were those of a man for whom violence had become second nature. Snape understood the cost of the darkness. That is why he chose to spend the rest of his life trying to tip the scale back toward light, even as he knew he could never truly return. The dark arts are many, varied, ever-changing, and eternal, he told his class. Fighting them is like fighting a many-headed monster, which each time a neck is severed, sprouts a head even fiercer and cleverer than before. He wasn't just giving a lecture. He was describing his own internal war. There are those who never practiced dark magic, but were still changed by it. Sirius Black, wrongfully imprisoned in Azkaban for 12 years, emerged a different man. Not simply thinner and older, but fractured. "You think the dead we loved ever truly leave us?" Dumbledore asked Harry once. Sirius's dead followed him too, friends murdered, a brother lost to Voldemort, a mind damaged by 12 years of exposure to the Dementors. The darkness of Azkaban didn't just cling to your skin, it found your softest thoughts and gnawed on them. Aura Catherine March, once lauded as a rising star in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, began having night terrors after a case involving Inferi in Wales. They were children, reanimated by an unknown warlock who vanished before he could be caught. March found them, fought them, destroyed them, but she couldn't forget their faces. Her partner said she started drawing them over and over in her journal, whispering their names. She left the ministry a year later. Her last letter read, "I used fire to kill what was already dead, and now I don't know if I can ever feel warm again." Fire is often used in cleansing. It's no wonder, then, that it is one of the few spells effective against Inferi, but the irony remains. To fight the unnatural, you must sometimes become unnatural. The light of a flame doesn't always push back the dark. Sometimes it only reveals more of it. Even Harry Potter, who never cast an unforgivable curse in hatred, though he did try, was changed by his proximity to darkness. His use of the Cruciatus curse on Amicus Carrow during the Battle of Hogwarts was not done with pure justice in his heart. It was rage. Amicus had spat in Professor McGonagall's face, and Harry acted with fury. The spell worked. It hurt Carrow, and in that moment Harry felt it. "You have to mean it," Bellatrix Lestrange had once said, and he had meant it. Harry later told Hermione he didn't feel proud of that moment. It lingered. It reminded him that he was not immune to what Voldemort had offered, that no one is, even the best of them. Dark magic tempts with power, with certainty, with the illusion of control. That's why it attracts not only the cruel, but the desperate. Merope Gaunt, Voldemort's mother, used a love potion to ensnare Tom Riddle Sr., a violation of consent so profound it rippled through generations. She had been abused, humiliated, and invisible. But in her quest for escape, she resorted to something darker than most realize, and her child was born under a lie, a manipulation, a shadow. Even Remus Lupin, one of the kindest and most principled men of his time, feared the darkness in himself, not because he was evil, but because the werewolf curse made him dangerous. He isolated himself, avoided love, declined leadership, all because he knew that under the wrong circumstances he could become a monster. It is the quality of one's convictions that determines success, not the number of followers, he once told Harry. But he also knew that conviction alone could not erase what lived in his blood. The Order of the Phoenix didn't just fight Voldemort, they fought what he awakened in themselves. Nymphadora Tonks, who lost her cheerful spark after the first deaths. Arthur Weasley, who hardened after his sons were targeted. Molly Weasley, who began to dream about the deaths of her children so often that her worst nightmare, seeing Ron dead, became a practice ground for the boggart in her cupboard. There's a reason the spell Obliviate exists. To forget is a mercy, but even that spell has its limits. Gilderoy Lockhart made a mockery of it, using it for fame, fortune, and fraud. But when it backfired and he lost his own memory, it became a twisted justice. Even in St. Mungo's he wrote with sparkly ink and smiled at strangers, but some part of him remembered the spotlight. He had once said, "Celebrity is as celebrity does." But perhaps he also knew deep down that identity is fragile, and magic, especially dark magic, tampers with it like a careless child with a spider. The Department of Mysteries houses rooms that remain locked, not because of danger to the physical world, but danger to the soul. One such room, rumoured to contain the echoes of intent, was sealed after 2 unspeakables fell into madness from prolonged exposure. They had tried to analyze the residue of unforgivable curses stored in ancient magical objects. Their minds became loops of regret, reliving decisions they'd never made. One of them kept saying, "I didn't cast it, I only wanted to understand." Darkness can be inherited too. Draco Malfoy, born into a legacy of superiority and shadow, flirted with the edge of the abyss for much of his teenage years. Given the chance to kill Dumbledore, he hesitated. That moment, where he stood trembling on the astronomy tower, marked a break in a long chain of darkness passed from father to son. But even though he didn't cast the final spell, the intent had lived in him. Years later, as a father, Draco told Scorpius, "The world changes and we must change with it." But he never pretended the past didn't shape him. The mark of the Death Eater is more than a tattoo, it is a reminder. And while some had it burned into their skin, others wore invisible marks on their conscience. The war ended. The Dark Lord fell. But for those who had served him, fought him, or simply survived him, forgetting was never an option. Forgiveness, perhaps, healing, maybe. But forgetting, never. So when we speak of dark magic, let us not speak of it as history or horror tales from another time. It is not gone. It lingers in artifacts, in bloodlines, in memories. As Sirius Black once said, no one ever leaves Azkaban unchanged, and in truth, no one ever truly leaves the dark once they've entered it. The best they can do is carry a light strong enough to keep the shadows at bay. Number 20. Muggles can suffer from dark magic, even without knowing it. There is a chilling truth that the wizarding world often prefers to whisper rather than proclaim. Dark magic doesn't care whether you are magical or not. Muggles, ordinary, unsuspecting people, may not wield wands or ride broomsticks, but they are far from immune. In fact, some of the most insidious curses ever cast found their way not into the hearts of auras or warring Death Eaters, but into the quiet bedrooms of Muggle homes, unnoticed, undetected, and devastating. In 1968, a Muggle family named the Granfords moved into a centuries-old cottage in the Sussex countryside. Margaret Granford, a schoolteacher, and her husband Charles, a retired RAF mechanic, had saved for decades to buy the ivy-draped home. Their children, Tommy and Alice, were overjoyed with the idea of living in a storybook house. What they did not know, and what no real estate agency could possibly have known, was that the house's previous owner had been Cuthbert Yaxley, a reclusive wizard suspected of experimenting with the mind-fracturing curse Cruciamenta Subtilis, a dark art banned since the 18th century. The Granfords began to suffer within months. It started with little things. Charles complained of hearing voices at night, not ghosts, but whispering, malevolent mutters, ones that seemed to emerge from nowhere and follow him through the halls. Margaret, once known for her cheerful disposition, fell into a deep melancholy, retreating from her family and spending long hours staring into a dusty mirror that had come with the house, a cracked, baroque thing that hung in the hallway. Soon, Alice began to scream in her sleep. "There's someone in the mirror, Mummy," she whispered one morning, her face pale. "He keeps showing me things, bad things." Margaret dismissed it as childhood imagination, but within weeks Alice had stopped speaking altogether. Tommy, just 7 at the time, began pulling out his hair and drawing symbols on the walls in red crayon. Symbols that no one in the Muggle world recognized, but which would have caused any wizard to raise an alarm. It wasn't until a young Ministry of Magic intern named Damien Shackle, cousin to the then Auror Kingsley Shacklebolt, noticed a strange pattern in a series of mental break incidents in the Sussex area that any magical authority paid attention. Damien, conducting what he thought was a harmless historical survey, stumbled upon Yaxley's name connected to the property and sent a confidential report to the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. An emergency team arrived late at night, disguised as chimney inspectors. They discovered the mirror in the hallway had a sealed ritual embedded in its frame, not a Horcrux, but something called a Vesperum Sigillum, a dark construct meant to prey upon the minds of the non-magical, slowly unraveling their sense of self. The mirror, as it turned out, had been enchanted to project emotional resonance, a sickening feedback loop of fear, shame, and sorrow that grew stronger the more it was observed. The mirror was quietly taken to the Department of Mysteries. The Granfords were moved to a private medical facility, their memories altered. Their home was burned under the guise of a gas leak. The Daily Prophet never ran a story, and yet the tale is retold in hushed tones among unspeakables as a perfect example of thin curses, enchantments so subtle, so quiet, that even magical detection spells fail unless used with precision and intent. The trouble with these sorts of spells, said former Hogwarts professor Batilda Twycross in a 1993 interview for Wand and Ward, is that they were never designed for magical targets. They're made to slip past magical resistance, to infest the soul through dreams, through reflections, through thoughts. A wizard might resist, a Muggle never would. Though such cases are rare, they are far from isolated. Another recorded incident occurred in 1972 in Edinburgh when a Muggle man named Malcolm Reeve began collecting antique books from estate sales. Among his collection was an innocuous leather-bound volume titled The Screaming Leaf. Its pages were blank, save for a single line written in Latin on the inside cover. Noli spectare dum dormit. Do not watch while it sleeps. Reeve of course couldn't read Latin, and when he placed the book by his bedside, he began to suffer from vivid hallucinations of bleeding walls, insects crawling beneath his skin, and his own reflection vanishing from mirrors. What he did not know, and would never know, is that The Screaming Leaf was an experimental spellbook created by none other than Septimus Maltziber, father of the infamous Death Eater, and a known proponent of spellbinding psychomagnetic anchors into physical objects. Aurors who recovered the book had to handle it with enchanted gloves and store it in a lead-lined container. It is now kept under lock and key in a vault marked Hazardous, Class 4. Maltziber's experiments were aimed at the fringes of magical ethics, namely the question of whether spells could exist in latent states, waiting for perception to activate them. For Muggles who cannot cast protective enchantments or detect magical presence, even passive exposure to such items can have devastating consequences. You see, writes Albus Dumbledore in one of his lesser-known letters to the Department of Magical Education, dark magic is not merely about power or destruction, it is about penetration of the mind, the soul, the everyday. When it latches onto those who cannot defend themselves, it reveals its truest, most parasitic nature. There was the case of the Galloway Orphanage in 1985, where a string of Muggle children reportedly became catatonic after playing with a box of old toys donated anonymously. It took a covert visit by Arthur Weasley and two Obliviators to discover that among the toys was a jack-in-the-box, cursed to emit Sibilus Memoria, a whispering charm that exposed its victims to the memories of its creator. The creator, as it turned out, had been a prisoner in Nurmengard and had gone mad in isolation. Every turn of the toy's handle forced children to relive fragments of his despair. The box was destroyed. The children recovered slowly, but some were left with inexplicable phobias and emotional instability. Their caretakers were made to believe it had been a case of mold poisoning. It would be naive to believe the Ministry of Magic keeps no record of such events. In fact, there exists, deep within the Department of Mysteries, an entire archive known as the Codex Obscura, a compendium of Muggle-affecting magical artifacts, spells, locations, and, disturbingly, people. Some individuals are known to emit trace amounts of dark magic from past exposure and can act as vectors for psychic distress in those around them, especially Muggles. Dolores Umbridge once scoffed at the idea. "Muggles are irrelevant," she reportedly said in a 1995 internal memo. "What they do not see cannot hurt them." She was wrong, and many believe her denial contributed to the Ministry's negligence in the London Underground incident of 1994. During that event, 4 Muggles vanished while cleaning an abandoned train tunnel near Camden. They were never found. What magical authorities discovered later was that the tunnel intersected with a long-forgotten magical wellspring, one used during the 17th century to dispose of cursed objects. Among them had been a cursed chandelier that dropped memory-wiping fog, a locket that screamed when opened, and a silver cage believed to contain the echo of a banshee's final cry. The unspeakables who entered the tunnel to investigate had to be led out, blindfolded, humming over their own voices to drown out the siren-like whispers echoing through the walls. Muggles who cannot defend their minds or interpret magical interference walk blind through such dangers. They pass cursed doors without knowing, they touch haunted stones without flinching, and they suffer, quietly, invisibly, because wizards do not always consider the consequences of their forgotten artifacts. One of the most haunting examples remains the story of Bethany Kerr, a Muggle child who wandered into a thicket in Wiltshire in 1991 and was found days later unable to speak. She had discovered, quite by accident, a forgotten Death Eater meeting site, still laced with Mors Morda residue and a residual Silentium viscera field, a hex designed to rob the soul of language. She never spoke again. What makes these incidents so difficult to track is that Muggles, by nature, look for rational answers: mental illness, carbon monoxide leaks, childhood trauma. But sometimes there is no rational answer. Sometimes the cause is a mirror hanging just a little too crooked, a book that never stays closed, a toy that laughs in the dark when no one is near. As Remus Lupin once told Harry, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. But perhaps it should be said too that the world isn't split into magical and muggle. Magic touches everything. Light or dark, it flows, and where it flows unchecked, it infects. No official guide exists to protect Muggles from cursed items, no warning posters or public announcements. The Ministry of Magic prefers silence, and better for the statute of secrecy, better for the illusion of control. But the truth is far darker. Muggles have always suffered from magic. The only difference is they don't have a name for it. And perhaps that's the darkest magic of all. Number 21. Some ancient families mastered darkness as an art. In the shadowed corridors of wizarding history, some families were not merely dabblers in dark arts. They were its custodians, its sculptors, its living embodiments. The Blacks, the Gaunts, the Rosiers, names whispered with a mix of fear and reverence, did not stumble upon darkness by chance. They inherited it like a family crest, wore it like a second skin, and wielded it like a conductor's baton over a silent symphony of shadows. The House of Black, with its ancient motto Toujours Pur, was more than just obsessed with blood purity. Their manor, 12 Grimmauld Place, was a mausoleum of forbidden knowledge. Curtains of black velvet, portraits of glowering ancestors, and walls saturated with ancient spells created an atmosphere where darkness was not hidden, it was honored. In one of its many cursed rooms, old tomes sat nestled between jars of dried serpents and vials of ash-black powder. These books bore no titles and no publishers. Their pages were stitched from parchment aged to the color of smoke, inked with runes that shimmered only in candlelight. To read them was to risk madness, and to the Blacks that was merely a rite of passage. Sirius Black, perhaps the only known rebel of his lineage, remembered these things not with nostalgia, but horror. "My mother," he once spat bitterly, "used to preach about the nobility of our line while the walls screamed with the memories of dark spells cast generations ago." Kreacher, the house elf bound by blood and loyalty, guarded these artifacts like relics. The portrait of Walburga Black, eternally shrieking behind her curtains, wasn't just a nuisance. It was a fragment of dark magic, trapped and angry, pulsing with the old family hatred. It was from such a house that Bellatrix Lestrange emerged, and her mastery of cruelty was no coincidence. She did not learn her spells in school. She absorbed them through her bones. Her childhood was not filled with lullabies and fairy tales. It was a litany of hexes and blood oaths. To her, the Cruciatus Curse was not a last resort. It was an expression of art. "You need to mean it, Harry," Bellatrix once whispered with feverish delight. "You need to really want to cause pain." How could she know this so intimately unless she had lived among those who made pain an inheritance? The Gaunt family, descended directly from Salazar Slytherin, were not merely recluses, they were degenerates, twisted by inbreeding and obsession. In the ruin of their shack, where Merop once cowered under the fury of her father Marvolo, one could still feel the residue of something ancient and vile. The Gaunts didn't study dark magic, they were born of it. The last relics of their pride, Marvolo's ring and Slytherin's locket, were not just family heirlooms, they were anchors for the most blasphemous of enchantments, Horcruxes. Marvolo Gaunt once held up the ring with trembling hands, shouting, "This is the mark of our bloodline, Salazar's mark." But that ring would become more than a symbol. It would be a vessel for Voldemort's soul. The darkness did not end with Marvolo. It festered in his son Morfin, who could speak Parseltongue and delighted in hexing muggles for sport. And in Merop, the crushed daughter, it simmered silently until it erupted in the form of a love potion, a final desperate act that would give birth to the Dark Lord himself. For the Gaunts, magic was not a choice. It was a prison, a legacy carved into the blood. The Rosier family, one of the oldest bloodlines in France and later England, stood proud among Voldemort's Death Eaters. Evan Rosier, who died fighting Aurors and took part of Mad-Eye Moody's nose with him, was not just a loyal servant of evil. He was a product of a culture that taught control through fear, loyalty through intimidation, and strength through cruelty. Though less is written about them, whispers in the Ministry speak of libraries in the Rosier estate that contain spells capable of draining life, not with a wand, but with a single breath from the caster's lungs. It is said that among the Rosiers, children were not tested by Albuels, but by how well they could break a man's will without touching him. Such families saw darkness not as corruption, but as refinement. Where others feared curses, they perfected them. Where others whispered about blood rituals, they held them in the dining hall under silver chandeliers. For them, power was not something earned. It was something owed by birthright. In these houses even the walls were cursed, bearing silent witness to centuries of cruelty, and sometimes even participating in it. Portraits would gossip, mirrors would judge, and sometimes a visitor would vanish before dessert was served. These legacies did not always produce monsters, but when they did, those monsters were masterpieces. Take Regulus Arcturus Black. He was raised in the same house as Sirius, fed the same poison of ideology. But his end was different. When he discovered the truth of Voldemort's Horcrux, he acted with bravery, but also with knowledge only a child of the Blacks could possess. He replaced the locket, leaving behind a note signed R.A.B., condemning the Dark Lord with words sharper than any blade. His betrayal was not just of Voldemort, it was of generations of dark tradition, and it cost him his life. Even the Malfoys, though not as ancient in their practice of the dark arts, understood its cultural significance. Lucius Malfoy was less a sorcerer and more a collector of artifacts, influence, and secrets. His manor was a museum of the forbidden, housing objects too dangerous for even the Department of Mysteries. During the Second Wizarding War, it became a base of operations for the Death Eaters, its white halls echoing with screams and spells. Narcissa Malfoy, though not a killer, was a master of subtle manipulation, using oaths and ancient customs to protect her son. He is dead, she lied to Voldemort to save Draco. She spoke the lie like an oath, using not magic, but lineage to twist the fate of a war. These families were dangerous not only because of what they knew, but because they believed in what they knew. The Blacks believed in purity, the Gaunts in destiny, the Rosiers in power. And unlike others who used dark magic for gain or revenge, these lineages used it for tradition. For them, every hex was a hymn, every jinx a chapter in a book no one else was allowed to read. In Grimold Place, one book stood chained and gagged, not locked, gagged. It growled when approached and could only be opened under a blood moon, with a drop of black family blood. No one knew what it contained. Sirius refused to touch it. But Kreacher used to whisper to it at night, calling it Mistress's favourite. The knowledge inside it was not meant for the world. It was meant for them, for those born into the line of dark scholars. Bellatrix, when captured, laughed in the face of the Aurors. "You think Azkaban frightens me?" she asked. "I was raised in a house where the walls wept blood and the chandeliers hummed with cursed melodies." She was not a madwoman. She was the culmination of centuries of worshipping power and punishing weakness. Her spells weren't taught at Hogwarts. They were family secrets, murmured over cradles and sung during funerals. And what of Voldemort himself? His rise was not possible without these families. They were his scaffolding, his apostles, his enablers. He didn't need to convert them, he merely reminded them of who they truly were. He gave the blacks a reason to feel superior, the Gaunts a reason to feel divine, the Rosiers a reason to feel invincible. Together they formed a pantheon of the old world, where darkness was not shunned but celebrated. These were not isolated cases. The wizarding world, for all its grandeur, was built on families like these. Some faded into obscurity. Others changed their names. But the shadows they cast are long and cold. Even now, in the post-war peace, there are children named Mulciber, Nott, Yaxley, carrying curses in their veins like ink in a quill. In Hogwarts, the forbidden section is heavily guarded, and even there, some books tremble with fear when touched. But in the homes of the ancient dark families, the real secrets remain, not just on shelves, but in the stories passed down in candlelit parlours, where great-grandfathers whisper to young heirs, "This is who we are. This is our gift." To them, magic was never just about charms or transfiguration. It was about dominance, about legacy, and above all, about knowing that true power is not always seen but felt, like a cold wind in a warm room, like a shiver before sleep, like a name, Rosier, Gaunt, Black, spoken just once and never forgotten. Number 22. Magical laws against dark arts don't always work. The forbidden forest was silent the night Amicus Caro slipped through its tangled branches. A sharp-toothed grin cut across his face as he held a small, shimmering vial, a relic he had recovered from Knockturn Alley, far from the eyes of the Ministry. Officially, dark artifacts like this were illegal, untraceable, undetectable, but that had never stopped the Caros, and it never stopped the others, because for all the Ministry's proud declarations, magical laws against the dark arts were often no more than thin veils, easily lifted, easily ignored. During the height of the Second Wizarding War, Minister for Magic Pius Thicknesser stood as a grotesque symbol of the law's failure. Enchanted by the Imperious Curse, he issued decrees that favoured Voldemort's Death Eaters. While the Ministry boasted about its strict regulation of unforgivable curses, one of its own leaders was under one, and no one knew. That was the weakness of the system. It trusted appearances. It trusted paper trails, magical signatures, official stamps and enchanted seals. But dark magic doesn't play by those rules. It whispers, slithers, hides in shadows, and inside people's minds. Even the Aurors, the so-called noble defenders of wizarding law, weren't immune to the murk of moral compromise. Kingsley Shacklebolt, widely respected and later a minister himself, once admitted that during intense battles, even good wizards were tempted to use dark spells. "We did what we had to," he said, after the Battle of the Seven Potters. Though not explicitly confirmed, there were rumours, whispers in the corridors of the Auror office, that several Cruciatus curses had been used on captured Death Eaters, not for justice, for revenge, for information, for fear. Take the case of Dawlish, a veteran Auror whose mind was scrambled by multiple encounters with dark curses. He once attempted to duel Dumbledore himself and failed. Later, he was sent to capture the elderly Muggle-born Dirk Cresswell and was humiliated. Yet he was entrusted again and again, pushed back into the fray. The law said the Aurors followed procedure. Reality? Dawlish was a pawn broken by repeated exposure to dark magic, used by a system desperate to look like it was in control. And then there's the question of cursed objects. No law can police what it cannot see. Tom Riddle's diary, for example, passed into the hands of Ginny Weasley without detection. No Ministry alarm sounded, no spell detected the living memory hidden inside. "It's just a diary," Ginny had said, clutching it to her chest in her first year at Hogwarts. By the time the truth was revealed, the Chamber of Secrets had already been opened, and a basilisk had claimed a victim. If not for Harry, the body count would have risen. What good was the law then? Dolores Umbridge, for all her strict adherence to Ministry protocol, wore a locket with dark enchantments, the Horcrux of Salazar Slytherin. It radiated a malevolence that slowly ate at the soul, and yet she used it as a symbol of purity, of power. No one questioned her. She ran the Muggle-born Registration Commission with cruelty that surpassed even the Death Eaters in some cases. "You have no right to be here. You are not a witch," she told a frightened woman on trial, her voice calm, her eyes gleaming. That wasn't the voice of justice. That was the voice of sanctioned hatred. The tragedy of Regulus Black illustrates another flaw in the magical legal system. A former Death Eater, he turned against Voldemort in secret. He discovered the truth about the Horcrux hidden in the cave, and he died trying to destroy it. But to the Ministry, he remained a traitor, a name blackened by family and choice. There was no redemption in the records, no legal path to posthumous honor. The law couldn't see courage hidden behind a mark. It saw only tattoos and affiliations. The law also failed during the Triwizard Tournament. Barty Crouch Jr., an escaped Death Eater, masqueraded as Mad-Eye Moody for months. He taught students, manipulated the competition, and placed Harry's name in the Goblet of Fire. The Ministry had no clue, no magical registry, no detection charm, no authority, not even Dumbledore, suspected the truth until the very end. When the real Moody was found imprisoned in a magical trunk, the lie shattered. But by then Voldemort had returned. When Harry later claimed Voldemort was back, the Ministry's response was denial, not investigation. Cornelius Fudge feared panic more than he feared truth. "He's not back," Fudge repeated again and again, not because he believed it, but because belief required action, legal action, and the Ministry wasn't ready to admit its impotence. Laws are only as strong as the people willing to enforce them, and fear, it seems, trumps law every time. Even Hogwarts under Umbridge's rule became a monument to the absurdity of over-legislation. The educational decrees, numbers 23 through 47, tried to strangle the school with rules. "I will have order," she insisted, conjuring parchment after parchment. But none of her laws stopped Fred and George from unleashing chaos. None prevented the creation of Dumbledore's army. In fact, they fueled rebellion because when the law becomes a weapon instead of a shield, people stop respecting it. And dark magic, always adaptable, finds the cracks. Consider the case of Marvolo Gaunt's ring. A powerful Horcrux, it also held the Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows. Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of his age, failed to resist its temptation. He put it on, and the curse nearly killed him. Not even the law could protect him from himself. In fact, no law warned of the ring's danger. It was too ancient, too obscure. Knowledge, not legislation, saved the world in the end. Snape, too, played both sides. As a double agent, he broke more laws than one could count. He brewed illegal potions. He used legilimency without consent. He altered memories, but he also died a hero. "Look at me," he said, his voice trembling, as he bled out in the shrieking shack. His crimes, committed in secret, were never tried, never judged, and perhaps they shouldn't have been, because sometimes the right thing isn't legal, and sometimes the legal thing is deeply wrong. Let's not forget Fenrir Greyback, a werewolf who chose to infect children. He wasn't even a Death Eater in the traditional sense. He didn't carry the mark. He was too wild, too uncontrollable. But the Ministry had no real answer for him. Their laws against werewolves pushed him further into darkness. They gave him no path to redemption. They treated him like a monster, and so he became one. In their attempt to contain danger, they created it. The forbidden section of the Hogwarts library contains books no student should read, but they are there, accessible, tangible. And often, curiosity wins. Hermione once used Moste Potente potions to brew polyjuice. It wasn't stealing, she later argued. just borrowing. But laws don't bend for intentions, only people do. And therein lies the paradox. The same law that prohibits dark knowledge sometimes forces those fighting darkness to seek it anyway. Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial. 12 years in Azkaban, no wand, no testimony, no due process. The Ministry, in its fear, chose efficiency over justice. When he escaped, they presumed guilt again. The law didn't protect Sirius, it buried him. "I did my waiting," he cried. "Had 12 years of it, in Azkaban." But no one listened, except Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The law had already decided who he was. Magical tracking systems, like the Trace, are blunt instruments. They mark magical use around underage wizards, but not who cast the spell. That's how Dobby's magic was blamed on Harry in Chamber of Secrets. Fudge's response? Underage magic, very serious offence. But no investigation followed, no attempt to identify the true source. The law assumed guilt. It demanded obedience, not truth. The case of cursed opal necklace sold at Borgin and Burke's is another warning. It passed through multiple hands. Each time, someone was harmed. Katie Bell nearly died. The law forbade the sale of dark artifacts, yet there it was, glinting under the counter in Knockturn Alley. Still for sale, still dangerous, because there are always buyers, always sellers, and always excuses. Horace Slughorn, the brilliant potions master, once told young Tom Riddle about Horcruxes. "Merely academic," Riddle had said. Slughorn later tried to erase that memory, ashamed. But the damage had been done. Laws didn't forbid the conversation, they couldn't. There are no laws against curiosity, against influence, against a talented student asking the wrong questions, and a teacher giving the wrong answer. And so the battle continues, not just against Voldemort or Death Eaters, but against the illusion of safety. Magical laws look good in textbooks, they shine on ministry posters, but they crumble in the face of reality. The world of magic is vast, ancient, unpredictable, and those who practice the dark arts know it better than anyone. They don't fear rules, they dance around them. "Understanding is the first step to acceptance," said Dumbledore, "and only with acceptance can there be recovery." That's why knowledge, not law, is our best defense. Books, memories, stories, the whisperings of portraits and ghosts, the warnings of history. Laws may fail, but truth endures. And sometimes the most powerful spell is simply knowing what's coming and having the courage to face it. Because dark magic isn't just in the wand, it's in the choices. And laws, they're only lines on parchment. What truly matters is the heart that holds the wand. Number 23. Not all dark wizards were evil. In the silent corridors of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, there hangs a portrait that most passers-by never stop to examine. Dusty, dimly lit, and lacking the grandeur of better-known faces, it depicts a man with tired eyes and long grey hair tucked behind his ears. His nameplate reads Adrian Arcturus Flim, Magical Healer, 1831-1898. Most have never heard of him. Those who do often remember only the scandal, but few know the truth. That the man once shamed as a practitioner of dark arts was also the reason dozens, perhaps hundreds, survived a surgery that should have claimed their lives. Dark magic. The phrase alone summons images of skulls, serpents, and screams in the night. From childhood, wizarding children are told to fear the unforgivable curses, the binding blood rituals, the infernal contracts that cannot be broken. But what if dark magic isn't evil by nature? What if, like a blade, its morality depends on the hand that wields it? Adrian Flim didn't set out to become a pariah. Born to a family of modest potion makers in Yorkshire, he showed promise early. At Hogwarts he was sorted into Ravenclaw, where he excelled in charms, potions, and most surprisingly, defense against the dark arts. He viewed magic not as a fixed doctrine, but as a living language, and he refused to believe some words should never be spoken. Magic itself. does not care what we think of it, he once wrote. It is we who give it purpose. It is we who make it cruel or kind. In 1862, long before the advent of magical anesthetics, Flimm was working at St Mungo's Hospital as a healer in training. Patients undergoing even minor operations often suffered traumatic shock, magical backlash, intense pain, even death. Flimm, after exhaustive research, turned to a spell whispered of in fearful tones, Imperio. It was forbidden, one of the unforgivable curses. Yet he believed it could do good. By applying the curse gently, with practiced control, he could suppress panic, dull pain, and render a patient calm and compliant through difficult procedures, and it worked. There was no pain, no screaming, no convulsions. Patients emerged exhausted but alive, and without memories of agony. A young witch named Mirabelle Dunsley, whose lungs had been damaged by a faulty potion, survived an experimental treatment under Flimm's care. Her family sent him a letter that remains preserved in the department archives. You gave us back our daughter. We do not care what spell you used. You saved her. But the wizarding world did care. When Flimm published his findings in the Journal of Magical Medicine, the backlash was immediate. The use of an unforgivable curse, regardless of intent, was seen as an ethical breach too severe to tolerate. The Society of Magical Physicians stripped him of his license. He was barred from practicing magic in any professional capacity. In a particularly scathing editorial, a senior healer wrote, "Flimm has crossed a line that divides us from beasts. Mercy bought with the tools of tyrants is no mercy at all." Flimm disappeared from public life soon after. Some say he returned to Yorkshire and lived in seclusion. Others believe he worked underground, helping those in pain without asking for permission or forgiveness. But his techniques did not vanish. Decades later, during the first Goblin rebellions of 1891, Aurors began using a modified version of the Imperious Curse to subdue violent suspects without lethal force, a practice that, ironically, was praised as humane restraint. This contradiction cuts to the heart of an uncomfortable question. Is a curse unforgivable because of its magic or because of its misuse? Flimm was not alone in testing the boundaries of dark magic. In 1753, a Transfiguration prodigy named Seraphina Leclerc used necromantic enchantments, traditionally associated with grave desecration and infernal summoning, to speak with the echo of her brother, killed in a duel gone wrong. Not to revive him, not to trap his soul, but to ask a single question: had he forgiven her? The ritual, recorded in her private journal and later published posthumously, did not involve any harm to the dead. In fact, it required a preservation of dignity and strict ethical codes. But the moment her writings surfaced, the Wizarding Council branded her a corruptrix. She was banned from teaching and spent the rest of her life in France under assumed names. Yet her work became the foundation. The modern resonant echo spell, a means of communicating with portraits, memories, and even certain magical echoes of the deceased. Every Hogwarts student who's ever spoken to a portrait owes something to Leclerc. Dumbledore himself once said, "It is our choices, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." But what if the choice is to do good using a forbidden tool? Let us not forget the case of Bartholomew Crispin, an unspeakable who, in 1937, discovered a way to track lost souls within the Department of Mysteries. He developed a variation of the Hominum Revelio charm that could detect consciousness in states between life and death. The charm's base structure was rooted in a 14th century blood magic ritual, the kind used by ancient cults to bind spirits. Crispin, horrified by the implications, refined it, diluted it, and used it to locate comatose wizards thought long gone. He saved 7 children from a vanished orphanage during the Blitz, all trapped in a magical limbo caused by collapsing wards. Crispin refused awards, but his notes were seized by the ministry and locked in the Black Archive. The spell, Revelatum Anima, is still classified as restricted knowledge, though it has quietly been employed in several high-profile rescue cases. So why does the stigma remain, Laetitia? Perhaps it's easier for the ministry and the world to draw a sharp line, light and dark, good and evil. It's simple, it's safe, but the reality is more complicated. A spell cannot hate, a spell cannot love. It is only power. As Hermione Granger once argued in her appeal to legalize house elf protections, intent must matter, otherwise we are not practicing justice, only fear. We see this tension even in the tales of the most infamous dark wizard of all time. Tom Riddle did not begin with cruelty. In the early chapters of his life, before the darkness swallowed him, he was a gifted student, a clever child, a boy seeking identity. His use of dark magic was a response to powerlessness. Had someone taught him that strength could come through compassion, would the outcome have changed? And what of Severus Snape? Half his life was spent steeped in darkness. Death Eater, spy, Occlumens, yet his motivations were not born of sadism, but of desperate love and guilt. Dumbledore trusted him not because he was pure, but because he chose to act in service of something larger than himself. "You are still loyal to her," Dumbledore said quietly. "After all this time?" "Always," came the reply. Snape used dark magic constantly. He brewed poisons, invoked hexes, studied curses. And yet he died a hero, having protected the son of the woman he loved, having given his life for a child who would never fully understand the sacrifice. Was he evil? Even Harry himself, in his final battle, cast the Cruciatus curse on Amicus Caro in a moment of fury. Was it right? Was it justified? He never used it again. But the act stands. The line had been crossed. And perhaps that is the point. It is not about never crossing the line, but knowing why you do and whether you are willing to bear its weight. In the annals of Hogwarts history, there are scattered mentions of a professor named Thasia Moorcroft, who in 1479 taught advanced spell theory. She believed that labeling magic as dark or light was akin to calling fire good or bad. She wrote in her final lecture, "To teach children that all fire is evil is to leave them cold in the dark. Teach them instead how not to burn themselves, and when warmth becomes flame." Moorcroft vanished during the Great Plague. Her writings, recovered in the ruins of her estate, were declared too dangerous to publish. Yet fragments survived, quoted in underground publications, whispered in the halls of Durmstrang and Mahutokoro. She is remembered not for her spells, but for her question. Do you fear the magic or the mirror it holds to your soul? Even today, auras occasionally whisper of spells not found in textbooks, tracking curses that borrow from ancient Sumerian shadow magic, memory extractions refined from rituals once outlawed by the Druids. These techniques are not taught at Hogwarts, but they are learned somewhere because in war necessity carves its own curriculum, and still the debate lingers. What makes magic dark? Its origin, its effect, or merely the discomfort it brings to those who fear the unknown? In a world that grows more complex with every generation, perhaps the only real sin is refusing to ask these questions. Perhaps the true danger is not the curse, but the silence that follows its name. Edrian Flynn never recanted. In his last recorded words, written in the margins of a battered journal, he said, "They will remember the pain I took away, not the spell I used, or perhaps they will remember nothing. That is mercy." So the next time we hear the words dark wizard, let us remember not all of them served evil. Some served pain, some served love, and some, like Flynn, served no master at all. Only the desperate hope that magic could be more than a weapon, that it could heal, even in shadow. Number 24. Some spells cannot be learned without inner darkness. There are spells that no amount of study can unlock, not for lack of intelligence or precision, but because they demand something far deeper, something rooted in the soul. The unforgivable curses, for instance, are not simply forbidden because of their effects. They are dangerous because they require an internal alignment with cruelty, domination, or hatred. You cannot fake the intention behind such magic. It must come from within. Take the Cruciatus Curse, Crucio, one of the darkest pieces of magic known to the wizarding world. It is not enough to speak the incantation and perform the proper wand movement. The curse only works if the caster truly, deeply desires to cause pain. This was explained with haunting clarity by Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. "You need to really mean it," he said in a cold voice, his eyes burning into the classroom. "You need to want to cause pain, to enjoy it. Righteous fury won't bring it off." Harry himself experienced this truth firsthand. In the Department of Mysteries, he tried to use Crucio on Bellatrix Lestrange after she murdered Sirius Black. The curse hit her, but it barely made her flinch. She laughed, and mocked him.
"Never used an unforgivable curse before, have you, boy?" she sneered. "You need to mean them, Potter. You need to really want to cause pain and to enjoy it. Righteous anger won't hurt me for long." Bellatrix, of course, knew what she was talking about. Her entire life had been a dance with darkness. What made Bellatrix so effective and terrifying in her use of dark magic was that she didn't just tolerate cruelty. She relished it. There was a mad glee in her eyes whenever she tortured someone. In Half-Blood Prince, when she sets fire to Hagrid's hut and duels with Tonks, we see a woman entirely consumed by a love for destruction. Her spells did not falter because her intent never did. Darkness lived inside her, a blazing, unchecked wildfire. Now contrast that with Hermione Granger, brightest witch of her age, quick-thinking, brave, fiercely loyal, and utterly incapable of casting such a curse, not because she lacked magical strength, but because her course simply did not allow it. Her heart was full of compassion, logic, justice. She could hex and stun and shield with the best of them, but cause suffering for the sake of it? That wasn't in her nature. Even when furious, Hermione reached for spells that restrained or protected. Darkness found no home in her soul. This is what makes certain spells inaccessible to even the most learned witches and wizards. It's not about wand quality, magical lineage, or years of training. It's about essence. Dark magic, true dark magic, acts as a mirror. It reflects and amplifies the worst, or most dangerous, parts of a person. That's why some spells, once cast, leave a mark on the soul. They are not just actions, they are revelations. Tom Riddle understood this better than anyone. His obsession with the dark magic wasn't merely academic, it was spiritual. He discovered that magic could be twisted, reshaped, perverted into tools of power. He knew that to unlock certain spells, one had to become the spell. To cast Avada Kedavra, the killing curse, with success, he trained himself to kill all empathy. The curse demands the absence of compassion, just as Crucio needs a desire to hurt. Avada Kedavra needs the complete and total will to destroy. When Riddle first experimented with murder, it wasn't on a whim. It was a deliberate sacrifice of his own humanity in exchange for magical potency. By the time he killed Myrtle Warren in the girls' bathroom, his heart was already turning to stone. The fragmenting of his soul into Horcruxes wasn't just about achieving immortality. It was the ultimate admission that he had become something else, something that dark magic recognized and embraced. Even Severus Snape, for all his complex loyalties and brilliant mind, walked this line carefully. He had once been drawn to the dark arts, fascinated perhaps by their raw power and secrecy. Yet when he turned away from them, when he chose to protect Harry in memory of Lily, there were spells he could no longer cast. Not because he forgot how, but because his intent had changed. Snape was proof that redemption dims the torch of darkness. Once you choose love over power, your magic shifts with you.
Consider Draco Malfoy's failed attempt to cast the Cruciatus Curse in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. He tried to use it on Harry in the Room of Requirement, but it lacked the fire. Draco, for all his arrogance and fear, was not evil, not truly. He was pressured, frightened, and torn Woodside, but not vicious. His spell fizzled because his heart couldn't sustain the hatred. Magic saw through the performance. Dark spells demand authenticity. Dolores Umbridge presents a strange variation, a woman who cloaked her cruelty in rules and pink cardigans, but whose soul was saturated with venom. She may have smiled as she inflicted pain, but she meant it. Her use of the blood quill on Harry was technically non-lethal, but it was a form of torture. She didn't need to shout curses. Her magic was passive-aggressive, soaked in sadism, bureaucratically justified, and it worked because she believed she was right. That righteousness, when tainted by malice, is often worse than open evil. Then there's the case of Gellert Grindelwald, a visionary, a revolutionary, a charismatic manipulator. His magic wasn't always outwardly cruel, but it was driven by control. Grindelwald could command legions because he tapped into the deep wells of desire, the need to dominate, to impose his will for the greater good. His spells worked not just because he was powerful, but because he was fully convinced of his right to use them. That belief became a source of magical fuel. Particularly chilling example comes from the Lestrange family. Rabastan and Rodolphus, like Bellatrix, demonstrated that madness and devotion to dark causes could supercharge dark magic. During their interrogation by the Wizengamot, they did not deny their crimes. They gloried in them. Their fanatical loyalty to Voldemort gave their curses a frightening weight. Torture for them was a performance of faith they cast from conviction. Some wizards believe they can dance on the edge, study the dark arts without succumbing, but few manage it. Dumbledore himself once flirted with that line. In his youth, when he bonded with Grindelwald, he was drawn to the lure of forbidden knowledge. It was only through heartbreak and the tragic death of his sister Ariana that he turned back. After that, Dumbledore never again trusted himself with dark magic. He understood that knowledge without conscience was a dangerous mix. And what of Harry? He was no stranger to pain, loss, or fury. Yet time and again, when offered the tools of vengeance, he refused. He could have killed Draco during their duel in Half-Blood Prince, but instead he used Sectum Sempra, a spell he didn't fully understand. Its horrifying effect shocked him. The magic had slipped from his grasp, and he realized just how easy it was to become what he hated. After that, he never used it again. Even in war, Harry chose defense over destruction. This contrast is what defines the moral landscape of the wizarding world. Magic is not neutral. It bends toward the spirit of the one who wields it, and while light magic responds to discipline, knowledge, and empathy, dark magic demands surrender, to anger, to fear, to power, lust. It's not a path you walk halfway. You either resist or you become. This is why so many Death Eaters bore the dark mark with pride. It was not just a symbol of allegiance. It was a magical brand that resonated with their internal states. The more cruelty they embraced, the stronger their spells became. Magic does not lie. You cannot fake darkness. You either carry it or you don't. The most terrifying aspect of these spells is not their effect, it's how naturally they come to those who have already crossed a line. For Bellatrix, Crucio was a lullaby. For Voldemort, death was a greeting. For others, the same incantations fall flat, empty words without the hatred to sustain them. The wand, the gesture, the syllables, these are only vessels. The true magic lives inside. This is what makes redemption in the wizarding world so rare. Once someone taps into that darkness, it leaves a mark, not always visible, But there, magic remembers. It becomes harder to return. The longer you dwell in hate, the more it becomes your source of strength. And giving up your power, even for the sake of the light, can feel like weakness. That's the trap. Ultimately, this reveals something deeper about the Harry Potter universe. Magic is not just energy, it is emotionally charged. The most powerful spells are not about strength, they are about truth, the truth of who you are. And sometimes that truth is too dark for redemption. Sometimes it's the spell that reveals the soul, and sometimes it's the refusal to cast it that saves it. Number 25. Some books have a dark life of their own. There are books in the Hogwarts library that no student should ever open, not because of the curses that may be layered upon them, though those are dangerous in their own right, but because some books are more than mere repositories of information. Some books breathe, they whisper, they watch, they live. In the restricted section of the library, veiled behind protective charms and guarded by Madame Pince's ever-watchful glare, lie tomes that radiate a palpable darkness. It's not only the subject matter, though dark magic, blood rituals, and forbidden enchantments abound. It's the books themselves that pose the danger. These are not inanimate objects, they are entities, living, breathing things that feed off curiosity, fear, and obsession. Take, for example, the Chronicles of the Black Oracle. Bound in cracked obsidian leather and sealed with 3 separate locks, the book lies dormant until touched. Its title is not etched, but instead writhes across the cover like a serpent, forming letters that vanish the moment you blink. According to a 1947 incident recorded in the library's archive, a 4th-year Ravenclaw named Edwin Thorne found a way to break its seals. He was a promising arithmancer, quiet, always lost in thought. No one saw him break the charms, they only found the aftermath. Edwin began speaking in tongues, wrote Professor Vortimer Greaves in his report to the headmaster. He carved runes into the dormitory walls using his own fingernails, claimed he could hear the future echoing through the corridors. One morning he vanished, not a single trace. Only the book remained, and even that had changed. Its cover was slick with a substance no one could identify. It smelled like burnt parchment and lilacs. The ministry briefly considered removing the book, but Dumbledore, who had only just begun his tenure as headmaster, insisted it remain. "There are lessons even in darkness," he had said solemnly, "but we must guard them well." Not all cursed books come with warnings. Some appear harmless, almost inviting. The Whispering Codex, for instance, is an unassuming volume with a blank spine. Open it, and the pages seem empty until, in silence, it begins to write. What it writes depends entirely on the reader. When Hermione Granger first came across it during her 6th year, she recounted that the book began scribing an essay titled The Ethics of Sacrifice in Temporal Manipulation. But when Seamus Finnegan opened it, the book whispered aloud, "He's watching you. He never sleeps." The ink appeared blood red. Seamus shut it instantly and claimed he had heard someone breathing just behind him. "I don't care what McGonagall says," he told Dean later that evening, voice trembling. "That book wasn't just enchanted. It knew me." And that's the true horror of these tomes. They know. They sense the reader's desires, their fears, their secrets. They adapt. The contents are not fixed, but mutable, shifting to exploit the mind of whoever dares turn their pages. This makes them dangerous not only to students, but to even the most seasoned witches and wizards. They are not books, they are reflections, dark mirrors in print. One particularly sinister specimen is the Lament of Morvenna, a thin manuscript that hums softly when touched. Legend holds that it was penned by a witch who had been excommunicated from the early Wizengamot for practicing necromantic rituals. When you read the pages aloud, her voice replaces your own. A Gryffindor prefect in 1913, Caroline Winterspoon, read from it during a late-night dare. The next morning, she claimed she couldn't remember her own name. "The voice in my head," she whispered to Madame Pomfrey. "It sings to me. It sings about things I've never seen." She was removed from Hogwarts under a strict Obliviate protocol. But 3 weeks later, her younger sister received a letter written in Caroline's precise hand. The letter contained no words, just an endless spiral drawn in ink that glittered silver and smelled faintly of grave dust. Professor Snape, who taught students to respect the perils of the restricted section, once remarked, "There are texts that do not teach, they consume, and some of you have minds far too fragile to remain whole after reading what lies beneath those covers." It is rumoured that the grimoire of Elsric the Pale attempts to form a contract with its reader. The pages rearranged to resemble ancient oaths, and once the incantation is spoken, the book demands tribute. A candle once placed near it burned blue, and its wax melted upward, defying gravity. During one fateful inspection in 1969, a visiting scholar from Durmstrang attempted to study it. He was found in the astronomy tower the next morning, his eyes glazed, repeating, "He promised me stars." Elsric, according to fragmented historical notes, was a warlock who believed books could be used as vessels for fragments of soul, an idea suspiciously reminiscent of Horcrux creation. Though no one has proven the connection, Dumbledore once cryptically told a young Remus Lupin, "Books are not always safe havens. Some are prisons and some are bait." And what of the infamous Book of Bleeding Time? Bound in red velvet that never dries, its title etched in moving silver script, this book is always warm to the touch. Once opened, it begins to track your pulse, syncing the rhythm of its pages with your heartbeat. The longer you read, the slower your heart begins to beat. Several years ago, a curious Hufflepuff lost consciousness before the end of the first chapter. Madame Pomfrey revived her, but her lips were stained black for weeks. "It tasted like forgotten hours," she murmured in the hospital wing, still half asleep. Some books don't require physical contact at all. The eyes of Argathos, now locked in a glass case enchanted by 13 security wards, is said to project dreams into the minds of anyone who spends too long staring at its cover. The dreams are not benign. They are labyrinths of memory, illusion, and fear. Filch once caught a 7th-year Slytherin gazing at the book after hours. The student insisted she'd been asleep for only a minute, but the clocks showed 2 days had passed. She had missed an entire weekend. "It told me to follow the red path," she said, shivering. "But there was blood on it. I kept slipping." The mystery of these books is not just in their magic, but in their intent. Unlike enchanted objects designed to serve or protect, these volumes seem to want. They hunger for readers, for attention, for connection, and they reward those who oblige them with madness, secrets, or vanishing. One cannot speak of such things without mentioning the Ashen Lexicon, a dictionary of forgotten curses. Every time a reader learns a new word from its pages, something in their life is erased. A memory, a friendship, a birthmark. Fred Weasley once claimed he saw it breathe. "It took a breath right before George opened it," he said, like it was excited. And perhaps most chilling of all is the tale of The Last Testament of Elowen Mirth. Elowen was a seer who went mad in her final years, and her manuscript, written backwards in mirror ink, describes events that never happened, or more accurately, haven't yet happened. Every person who has read it begins to see things, accidents before they occur, tragedies before they unfold. A third-year girl who skimmed a page of it screamed in the great hall the next morning, pointing at her friend. "Don't eat that egg," she cried. Moments later, a piece of shell lodged in the girl's throat and she nearly choked. Some professors argue these books should be destroyed, but others, like Professor Vector, disagree. "Knowledge, even when dangerous, has value," she insists. "You don't burn down a forest because a few trees are poisonous." Still, most students know better than to meddle. Even the marauders, in all their recklessness, avoided the section after Sirius claimed to see his own reflection blink at him from the glass of the forbidden case. "And I wasn't blinking," he added grimly. There are even tales whispered among the portraits. Portraits, mind you, that live alongside these books and observe what unfolds when no one else is looking. The portrait of Erasmus Goldhook, a former librarian from the 1700s, once told Harry, "They whisper to each other at night. They rearrange themselves on the shelves. They plan." This begs the question, can books possess will? Can they remember those who wronged them? Some say yes. A girl in 1923 mocked the Tome of Sighs, calling it a mouldy heap of garbage. The next night, she fell into a deep sleep and never woke. The book was found beside her bed. Its pages were blank. "There's a reason we wear gloves," Madame Pince has said more than once. "A book can hold poison deeper than any potion." Perhaps it is fitting that such books remain in Hogwarts, a place built on ancient magic, secrets and shadows. But they serve as a warning as much as a lesson. Not all knowledge is meant to be touched. Some truths lie in wait not to be discovered, but to be endured. And if you ever find yourself in the restricted section, reaching toward a book that seems to call your name, pause. Listen carefully. That whisper may not be in your head. It may be the book choosing you. Number 26. Dark amulets can awaken fear and submission. In the shadowed corridors of the magical world, there exist objects so potent, so steeped in dark enchantments, that their very presence can distort the emotions and decisions of those around them. Unlike the cheerful trinkets worn for love or luck, these are forged with sinister intent. They do not protect. They dominate. They do not attract fortune. They siphon will. Among these, none has stirred more hushed whispers in the restricted sections of magical libraries than the infamous Mors Mortis ring, an amulet so drenched in malevolent purpose that even its name echoes the dark mark itself. The origins of the Mors Mortis ring are murky, hidden beneath layers of magical obfuscation and centuries of deliberate censorship. Yet fragments of its story persist, tucked away in the personal notes of obscure scholars and buried in confiscated diaries of those who lived too close to darkness. According to one such account found in the sealed archives of Durmstrang Institute, the ring was forged during the 13th century by a sorcerer known only as Ekran Volan, a name that does not appear in any official record, yet emerges frequently in whispered legends of cursed artifacts and forgotten spells. The ring itself was said to be forged from a rare alloy, obsidian infused with powdered basilisk fang, cooled in the waters of the Lethe, a mythical river of forgetfulness said to run beneath the Albanian mountains. Set into its band was a stone the colour of old blood, a garnet so dark it appeared black unless it caught direct moonlight. Those who wore it claimed to hear murmurs when alone, voices that spoke in an ancient tongue and promised them dominion, if only they surrendered a piece of themselves. Few resisted. The legend most frequently cited involves the forgotten village of Bruggenfell, a now vanished settlement somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. As the tale goes, Volan approached the village alone, cloaked and hooded, bearing no weapon. The villagers, suspicious of outsiders during that harsh winter, prepared to defend themselves. Yet when Volan stepped into the square and raised his hand to reveal the ring, silence fell. The bravest among them, a woman named Magra Donnell, reportedly dropped her wand mid-incantation. "It felt like the world had grown cold from within me," her account read. "I could not think. I could only kneel." What made the Mors Mortis ring uniquely terrifying was not merely the fear it induced, but the submission it harvested. Witnesses described it as a draining sensation, like the warmth being pulled from their blood, their courage leached from their bones. Some wept without understanding why, others simply bowed their heads and waited to be commanded. The village fell in less than an hour, no duel, no bloodshed, only surrender. It is said the ring's enchantment was built upon a twisted branch of legilimency, not the reading of thoughts, but the suppression of them. Volan's victims described foggy minds, blankness, and the inability to remember their own names while under its influence. According to an unearthed Gringotts ledger, the ring eventually changed hands, sold for a dragon's ransom to an unknown buyer, identified only as R. Vai in the ledger's column. While the identity is speculative, some believe this was Rodolphus Lestrange's ancestor, Regulus Varron, an early sympathizer of dark ideologies. Centuries later, in the chaos following Grindelwald's rise, the Mors Mortis ring was believed to have resurfaced briefly in the possession of a Hungarian warlock named Sabo Král. During a conflict in the Carpathian borderlands, Kroll reportedly captured 3 auras without casting a single spell. Survivors found their bodies intact, but their expressions, frozen in contorted despair, were deeply unsettling. One of the aura's wands was discovered shattered, yet there were no signs of magical combat. The only clue was a burnt, ring-shaped impression on the wooden floor near the bodies. Albus Dumbledore, while never directly referencing the ring, spoke cryptically of objects capable of bending will not through charm, but through dread itself, during a conversation with Harry in Half-Blood Prince. There is more to fear from that which commands through silence than from that which shouts with fire. Scholars later speculated he referred to either the Mors Mortis ring or a similar artifact rumoured to have been created by the same lineage of dark magicians. Dark amulets such as this exist at the intersection of enchantment and psychological warfare. Unlike the Imperious Curse, which forcibly overrides the will, the ring's influence was more insidious, offering the illusion of choice, while quietly stripping its victims of resistance. Professor Emeric Fain, an expert in magical artifacts at the Department of Mysteries, noted in a classified interview, "With the Imperious, you know you're being controlled. With an amulet like Mors Mortis, you simply stop fighting because it feels easier." The psychological residue left behind by such artifacts is immense. Wizards exposed to them have shown long-term effects: paranoia, memory gaps, and in some cases a permanent dulling of magical ability. One such case is recorded in St. Mungo's records, a former curse-breaker named Dorith Winley, who encountered a cursed pendant in the ruins of an old castle near Azay-le-Rideau in France. Though the artifact was not the Mors Mortis ring, it was believed to be forged with a similar technique. Winley survived, but he never cast a spell again, claiming the magic had been drained from him through his bones. The Ministry of Magic, recognizing the threat posed by such items, established in 1742 a hidden sub-department under the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Office of Cursed Objects and Forbidden Amulets. This office, rarely mentioned in public documentation, is responsible for tracking, identifying, and either securing or destroying items like the Mors Mortis ring. Some insiders refer to it as Vault Zero. In a recovered letter from Amelia Bones to then-Minister Millicent Bagnold in 1980, she wrote, "We believe the ring was last seen near Durmstrang. Attempts to retrieve it have failed. 3 agents have disappeared. The enchantment appears to repel not by force, but through the mind. We must not let it fall into he who must not be named's hands. What happened to the ring afterward remains unknown." Curiously, Voldemort himself, despite his obsession with powerful objects, never used the Mors Mortis ring. Some speculate he feared it. Others believe he sought to replicate its power through the more direct terror of his Horcruxes. Indeed, in Deathly Hallows, when Harry observes the locket Horcrux affecting Ron and Hermione, he notes, "It made everything feel hopeless, like we had already lost." A similar effect, perhaps, though the locket was born from soul fragmentation, not the dark alchemy of submission. The ring is not the only dark amulet to have such influence. In 1817, the Chain of Velnor, a necklace composed of cursed iron links, was said to cause panic in large crowds when worn. Witnesses reported uncontrollable crying and flight. The chain was destroyed in a controlled implosion within the Department of Mysteries, though reports suggest it howled as it broke. And in 1923, the Eye of Tharnax, a brooch shaped like a weeping eye, was confiscated from a Belgian necromancer. It made children cry in their sleep within a 1-mile radius. But the Mors Mortis ring remains the most infamous, not only because of its effects, but because of its enduring mystery. Unlike many dark artifacts that are ultimately destroyed or hidden behind layers of enchantments, the ring vanishes and reappears in whispered reports, always just out of reach, like a myth that refuses to die. Some say it has intelligence, that it chooses its bearer. Others claim it cannot be held by the same person twice, a safeguard built into its creation. In the post-war years, when magical historians attempted to catalogue the artifacts used or sought by Death Eaters, the ring's name once again surfaced. Igor Karkaroff, under Veritaserum, mentioned a ring darker than death, which draws men like moths. However, he did not elaborate, and the record ends abruptly. Some believe it was found in a forest in Norway. Others claim it lies beneath the ruins of Bragenfell itself, guarded by enchantments that erase memory upon approach. For now, the Mors Mortis ring remains a cautionary tale among artifact hunters. Many doubt it even exists. Others believe it is still active, worn by someone unsuspecting, slowly influencing decisions that ripple outward like the echoes of a spell long cast. One former unspeakable wrote anonymously, "You would not know if your mind was no longer your own. That is the true horror of Mors Mortis, not what it does but what it takes from you without asking." In the Hogwarts library, tucked deep in the restricted section, one book bears a single, cryptic line scrawled in the margins of a dusty page on magical artifacts. "He who wears the ring hears only silence, because even his thoughts are no longer his own. Whether warning or record, no one knows." And so the amulet remains legend. But in a world where shadows often precede danger, perhaps it is wise to remember the objects that do not merely destroy, but command. The most dangerous weapon, after all, is not the wand, but the will that no longer belongs to you. Number 27. Some spells feed on pain, not just others, but your own. They say pain is the most honest emotion a wizard can offer. It cannot be faked, conjured, or brewed in a cauldron. And that's precisely what makes some of the darkest spells in magical history so terrifyingly powerful. These spells do not merely use pain as fuel, they require it. The pain of the caster, not just of the victim. They demand sacrifice. Not in the symbolic sense, but in the deepest, most visceral way. These are the spells that take more than magic, they take pieces of your soul. In the shadowy archives of the Department of Mysteries, there are whispered accounts of incantations so ancient, so dangerous, that even the unspeakables dare not speak their names aloud. They are not classified under the unforgivable curses, for their danger lies not in the immediate result, but in what they do to the caster. These are the spells that, once cast, leave the wizard hollow, scorched from the inside, and forever changed. One such spell is Murmuris Noctem, the Whisper of Night. Little is known about its exact origin, but fragments of its incantation appear in a worn grimoire of the 13th century, believed to have been penned by a Breton warlock named Alaric du Coeur Noir. The spell was designed not just to destroy, but to silence, to erase presence. It didn't simply kill its victims, it devoured their memory from the physical world, leaving only the void where once there had been life. And to summon that kind of erasure, one had to give something equally irreversible in return. It was Thaddeus Mulciber, brother to the better-known Death Eater Augustus Mulciber, who reportedly used Murmuris Noctem during the First Wizarding War. Thaddeus was not a name often heard, for he operated in the quiet shadows, favouring forbidden magic that Augustus himself refused to touch. When his wife, Marlene Edgecombe, cousin to Madame Edgecombe of the Department of Magical Transportation, was killed during a raid on their safe house in Skye, something in Thaddeus broke. Witnesses later described a single night in which the northern outpost of Auras stationed in Caithness vanished. No bodies, no wreckage, just silence. Magical tracking signals blinked out one by one, and the only evidence that anything had ever existed there was the scorched earth, as if the land itself had screamed and then fallen into silence. 3 days later, Thaddeus Mulciber was found in the Forest of Dean, sitting by a stream, mouth sewn shut not by thread but by magic. He had not simply lost the ability to speak, he had given it up, given it willingly, for pain, for vengeance. Not all dark spells require pain to cast, but the ones that do are never used lightly. Pain, especially emotional pains, is unstable magic. It doesn't flow, it erupts. And channeling it through a wand is like trying to hold lightning in your palm. Most cannot bear it a second time. A young witch named Cressida Bones, a distant relative of Amelia Bones, is believed to have survived casting a similar spell during the skirmishes in Eastern Europe in the 1970s. When her bonded sister Ilona was tortured to death by rogue vampires aligned with Gellert Grindelwald's old sympathizers, Cressida hunted them to the Carpathians and used a spell referred to only as Cauda Doloris, the heart of pain. The spell tore the vampires apart from the inside out, as if their hearts had been ignited by grief. But Cressida herself collapsed afterward. She awoke blind, her optic nerves apparently burned out by the magical feedback. "It's not something you study," wrote Cressida years later, in a private journal donated to the Hogwarts Library under a sealed archive. "It's something you feel. The spell was there in my bones before I ever spoke it. I didn't learn it. I became it." Dark spells of this nature are not passed down by mentors or found in books. They are born from necessity, birthed in moments of such raw anguish that the boundary between spell and scream vanishes. A wand might amplify the pain, shape it, give it form. But the origin is always the same: loss. Even Severus Snape, a man steeped in the art of dark magic, hinted at such spells during his tenure at Hogwarts. In one of his more volatile lessons with the 6th years, he remarked sharply, "You believe magic is neat? Clean. Magic is blood. Magic is choice. There are spells you'll pray you never have reason to know." And though the students were too stunned to question further, Hermione Granger later wrote in her own post-war essay, Unspoken Magic, The Grey Between Light and Dark, "I believe Professor Snape had seen magic that hurt more than it healed. I believe he'd used it. Another harrowing example came from the battle-scarred Auror Alastor Moody, who once confessed, during a particularly bitter night at the Hog's Head, that he had seen a spell called Obliviorum Cruoris cast only once. "It requires the caster to cut their own palm," he muttered, downing a swig of fire whiskey. "The spell feeds off the blood, but not just the blood and the memories in the blood. You don't just kill the enemy, you erase them, you forget they ever were. Trouble is, you forget a bit of yourself too. One of my best men used it. He never remembered his son's name again." Spells like these are not taught, they emerge. When grief becomes unbearable, when justice blurs into revenge, when love dies and something darker takes its place. In the wreckage of these emotions, a spell sometimes rises, primal, unbidden, irreversible. And it's not just humans who are affected. In the mountains of Albania, centaur seers speak of an ancient curse, vocem umbrae, that is only cast during mourning rituals. The one who utters it becomes a vessel for ancestral pain, calling upon spirits to avenge a bloodline. But once the spirits answer, they do not leave. The centaur becomes mute and haunted, often disappearing into the woods, never to be seen again. Pain-linked magic is not about control, it's about surrender. The caster doesn't direct the spell, they give in to it. That's what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. Ordinary spells are shaped by intention. These spells are shaped by agony. Even Lord Voldemort, for all his mastery of the dark arts, avoided pain-fed magic. He understood its power and its cost. For Voldemort, pain was something to inflict, not to endure. His spells punished others. He had no use for magic that required vulnerability. "There is no good and evil," he famously said. "There is only power and those too weak to seek it." But he misunderstood something crucial. There is a kind of power born from weakness, and it terrifies even the darkest of wizards. Perhaps the most chilling account of pain magic was discovered in the ruins of Nurmengard after the fall of Grindelwald. In a hidden chamber beneath the fortress, Aurors found carvings in the stone floor, runes that pulsed faintly with residual magic. One rune translated loosely to Vincula Doloris, chains of sorrow. Aurors believe Grindelwald developed it to bind traitors to their worst memories, forcing them to relive the moment of their greatest regret endlessly. The spell could only be cast by someone who had also endured unbearable remorse. It was never found written down, only carved with fingernails into stone. What makes these spells so sinister is not merely their destructive capability. It's that they connect. They create a feedback loop between the caster and the target, a psychic umbilical cord of shared pain. And when the spell is over, it leaves both parties changed or destroyed. There is even speculation that the infamous veil in the Department of Mysteries is a relic of pain-fed magic. Some unspeakables believe it was originally part of an ancient punishment ritual, activated only by those who had lost everything and had nothing left to give but themselves. It whispers to those who approach it. And for those who've known loss, the whisper is louder. We often think of magic as a tool, something to wield, but spells like Murmuris Noctum remind us that sometimes magic wields us. These incantations are not born in classrooms or textbooks. They are forged in funerals, in quiet screams, in shattered hearts. "Magic always leaves a mark," said Dumbledore. "Sometimes that mark is physical. Sometimes it is carved into the soul." These spells are rare not because they are hidden, but because few survive the moment that births them. And those who do are never quite the same. There are whispers, and they are only whispers, that a spell even darker than Avada Kedavra exists, a spell that requires not hatred, but love turned to despair, a spell that can only be cast in the moment a heart breaks so utterly that it ceases to believe in its own beating. No one has ever confirmed its name. But the Department of Magical Catastrophes keeps a locked drawer with a single parchment. On it, written in dried blood, are the words, "Nullum post amorem," nothing after love. It is a spell no one hopes to understand. But it is said that should it ever be spoken again, the world itself would weep. Number 28. Portals of darkness exist, but no one controls them. In 1978, 3 Aurors vanished without a trace during a routine investigation in County Kerry, Ireland. Their last message was cryptic. "We found the stones. They hum." The wireless signal went dead minutes later. What followed was a quiet but thorough internal inquiry at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. And then, as quickly as the matter had arisen, it was buried, not with answers, but with silence. No public statements, no recovered bodies, and certainly no mention of what they had supposedly found, a circle of black stone, cold to the touch, humming with invisible energy. The local magical community spoke of it only in whispers, calling it a portal of darkness. These portals, known in older magical circles as Janue Tenebris, are said to be ancient, far predating the establishment of Hogwarts in the 10th century. Descriptions vary, but the one consistent element is their ability to bend the fabric of reality. They are not vanishing cabinets, they are not portkeys, they are not even experimental magical constructs, they are doorways, literal threshold, to alternate magical planes where the laws of time and magic dissolve, reassemble, and sometimes feed on the minds of those who dare to enter. An archived and heavily redacted report stored in a sealed vault at the Department of Mysteries names the missing Aurors, Cormac Griggs, Eyelid Flynn, and Thaddeus Roll, the latter being a distant cousin to the infamous Death Eater Thorfinn Roll. They were investigating unlicensed spellcasting in abandoned druidic ruins. According to their field notes, which survived the expedition, the site was surrounded by trees that grew in unnatural curves, as if pulled by gravity toward the center of the ruin. In the middle stood a ring of black stones, basalt, but strangely warm, as if alive. Many in the magical community argue these portals are only legend, ghost stories told by older generations of witches and wizards, but there are references, subtle but persistent, in some of the oldest magical texts. In Secrets of the Silent School, author Gaspar Roxton writes, "In the hills of the Forgotten Lands there are circles made not by druids, but by those who knew deeper, darker things. Step inside and the world you know will whisper your name as you fall away." Some scholars have pointed to strange episodes in magical history where witches or wizards disappeared under unexplainable circumstances. One such case occurred in 1842 when a team of magical botanists led by Professor Emerita Glenda Twigg from Castello-Bruxo vanished while exploring the ruins of a Pictish fort in Scotland. The only thing left behind was a journal filled with erratic handwriting and smudged ink. One line repeated itself over 20 times. It opened. It looked back. What makes the portals so terrifying is not just their mystery, but their indifference. They are not traps set by malevolent minds. They do not lure you with glowing lights or voices. They simply are, unchanging, watching, waiting. A young wizard named Ephraim Blott, who wrote extensively on magical anomalies before his disappearance in 1923, described them as the cold eye of the void blinking open in our garden. His last known letter, addressed to his sister, contained only 3 words. "It isn't closed,